You learn over time that hospice work isn't about preventing death. It's about preserving dignity. You're not fighting the inevitable. You're making it as peaceful and as human as possible. I've been in this field for nearly 2 decades, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that dying is rarely as predictable as textbooks claim. Some patients decline gradually, a slow unwinding of the body. Others hang on far longer than we expect, or go suddenly without the so-called warning signs. You try to read the cues, breath patterns, modeling, withdrawal, but even with experience, there are moments you miss, or would have missed, if not for something else. In our case, that something else was Rosie. Rosie was a short-haired calico, older than most of our staff, who'd lived at the facility since before I started. She didn't belong to any one person. She'd just been dropped off as a stray one day, wandered through the automatic doors, and stayed. We tried once or twice to adopt her out, but the residents protested. Staff joked she'd claimed the place as her territory, and eventually we stopped trying to argue with her. What set Rosie apart wasn't just her calm demeanor or the way she could soften even the most agitated patient. It was her timing. She had a reputation for curling up beside residents who were nearing death. And I don't mean occasionally. I mean consistently. When a patient withdrew from food, grew more still, or started exhibiting terminal signs, Rosie often found her way to them before the chart flagged the changes. It became common to see her curled at the foot of a bed, just quietly keeping watch. I'd seen family members take comfort in it. "She knows," they'd whisper. "She's saying goodbye." But then came the night Rosie broke her own rules. It was late October. The building was running on low energy, as it often does during the colder seasons. Fewer visitors. The patients slept more. Staff morale was steady but tired. We'd had 3 passings that week alone. I was covering the night shift with Marissa, a solid nurse, young but competent. I was checking through charts, sipping what had become my 3rd cup of lukewarm coffee, when I heard a sound that immediately made me pause. A meow. Loud. Another. Urgent. Not the casual, chirpy meow Rosie gave when she wanted attention or a piece of someone's chicken. These were sharp, repeated, like someone pounding on a door, not with fear, but with insistence. I stood up, and so did Marissa. We both looked at each other. "You hear that?" I asked. "Rosie?" We followed the sound together. It led us down the east hallway, past the rooms where our more stable patients resided. The kind we checked every few hours, gave meds, adjusted pillows. No one in immediate crisis. That's what made it odd. Rosie was pacing outside room 219, claws lightly tapping the tile, tail stiff like a metronome. Her front paws were darting at the door. Tap, 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 back and forth. She was trying to get our attention, and she wasn't letting up. Room 219 belonged to Mr. J, 68, nonverbal since a stroke last spring, prostate cancer, stage 4, but not actively dying. His vitals had been holding, albeit tenuously, for weeks. His daughter came twice a week to feed him pureed fruit and read from a collection of his favorite American westerns. We'd been managing his pain well. No signs of restlessness, no drastic dips in vitals, no swelling or fever. But Rosie wouldn't leave his door. I knocked gently and let myself in. It was dim inside, as usual. The room always smelled faintly of eucalyptus. His daughter liked to leave essential oils in a diffuser by the window. I approached quietly, almost guiltily, not expecting to find anything new. Jay was lying in his standard side position, arms relaxed over the blanket, head slightly slumped forward. But the moment I leaned over to assess, I felt it. His breathing was irregular, shallow, the kind of pattern we watch for, but it hadn't been like this during the last check 2 hours prior. I touched his wrist, weak, thready pulse. I turned on the bedside monitor. Blood pressure had dropped dramatically, barely 80 systolic. Oxygen saturation had tanked into the low 60s. He was pale, cooler than normal. His pupils were reactive, but sluggish. There had been no report of this trend earlier in the evening. Nothing in the notes, no flagged observations from the techs. It came on fast. I called out to Marissa. She was in with me in less than 30 seconds. We weren't trying to reverse anything. We were in hospice. But we could at least bring comfort. He was still conscious, if barely. We repositioned him, administered sublingual morphine for respiratory ease, and started low-flow oxygen just to relieve the visible strain. While we worked, I kept glancing at the door. Rosie was there, sitting now, watching, silent again. We phoned Mr. J's daughter. She lived 25 minutes away, but she came. She arrived just after 3:40 a.m. No tears at first, just shock. We told her he had time. We told her he was stable. I hated that feeling, that fragile balance between clinical assessment and the unpredictability of nature. Sometimes we just don't know. But she got to say goodbye. She held his hand, read one final passage from his worn paperback copy of Shane, then kissed his forehead and whispered something in his ear I'll never repeat. He passed just before 5 a.m. We cleaned the room, called the funeral home, made the arrangements. She sat with him until the sun came up. And Rosie? She had moved on. When I walked past the kitchen later that morning, I found her curled in a cardboard box beside the vending machine, asleep. We never mentioned it in the official report. You can't chart cat-alerted staff to patient distress. But I noted in my personal log that if it weren't for Rosie, Mr. J would have died alone, and his daughter would have missed those last few hours. Over the years, I've told that story to a few hospice nurses I trust. The kind who understand the weight of this work. The kind who know that not everything meaningful fits inside the clinical frame. Rosie passed away in her sleep the following spring. Natural causes. We buried her behind the facility in a little garden the residents kept, planted a patch of lavender where she liked to sunbathe. There hasn't been another cat since. But I still work nights. And sometimes, especially when things get too quiet, I think I hear a soft meow echoing down the East Hall. I always go check, and I always start with room 219, just in case. Hello friends, and thank you so much for tuning in. A special shout out to our incredible subscribers. Your support keeps these creepy, fascinating, and sometimes even comforting stories alive. But here's something to think about. Only about 30% of our viewers are subscribed. If you enjoy our content, hitting that subscribe button helps more than you might realize. It only takes a second, but it makes a world of difference. While you're at it, a like and share go a long way in keeping these eerie tales coming. Thank you again for being part of this journey. You're the reason we're here. See you in the next one, if you dare. You stay in this field long enough, you stop being surprised by death. You stop being shocked by how fast it comes or how long it lingers, but you don't stop being changed by it. Every patient, every passing, leaves something behind. Not always something you can see, but you feel it. Sometimes in your chest, sometimes in your gut, sometimes in the hallway. We had a room in our hospice facility, room 14. Officially, it was just another room. 2 windows, built-in oxygen, laminate floors like all the rest. But unofficially, nobody liked room 14. Staff avoided it. Patients didn't ask for it, and families rarely wanted to sit in there for long. It was always cold, even when the vents said otherwise. And though no one ever said it out loud on the record, we all knew something was off. We didn't use it often, only when we were completely full or backed up from the hospital. And when we did, things never went smoothly. But this story isn't about the room itself. It's about what happened outside of it, and how a cat, not a person, told me something I wasn't ready to hear. Her name was Callie, another stray like Rosie before her. Solid black with a patch of white on her chest and a half-bitten ear. Not friendly, not mean, just observant. She kept to herself most of the time, slipping in and out of rooms when no one was looking. Most of the patients adored her. The ones who couldn't speak would still try to pet her when she hopped up beside them. But Callie didn't show affection the way other cats did. She didn't purr much. She didn't knead or rub her head against people. She just watched. And you got the feeling, sometimes, that she was listening to things you couldn't hear. It was late November when this happened. Quiet night. Most of our beds were full, but nothing out of the ordinary. 2 patients actively dying, 1 on comfort care, the rest stable. I was walking the west corridor, checking on vitals and IV lines. Callie was trailing behind me, weaving between doors, pausing now and then like she was keeping pace but on her own terms. I got used to her shadowing me during night rounds. Then we reached room 14. The door was closed, lights off. No one had been assigned there in over a week. We deep cleaned it and left it empty per usual because nobody wanted to stay there unless they had no choice. I glanced at the door as I passed, more out of habit than anything. That's when I heard it. A low, steady sound. Not a meow, not a hiss. A growl, deep, controlled, coming from Callie. She was planted in place, eyes locked on the door. Her body was crouched low, tail puffed but not thrashing, ears forward, focused. And that growl, it was constant. No peaks, no breaks. Just this deep, vibrating warning like she was standing off against something. I knelt beside her, tried to comfort her, even reached out to stroke her back. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just kept growling, her gaze frozen on the space beneath the door of room 14. I didn't hear anything inside. No movement, no draft, nothing. And yet, Callie's reaction wasn't casual, it was protective, like she knew what was behind that door and wanted it to stay there. I stood up, pressed my ear to the door. Still nothing. It didn't feel like fear, exactly. It felt like a warning, like something that shouldn't be touched. I walked away eventually. So did Callie, though not immediately. She lingered for another minute, then gave one final growl and padded off down the hall. I didn't sleep easy the rest of that week. A few days later, a CNA who'd only been on the job a month asked casually in break room, "Hey, what's the deal with room 14? I saw it in the schedule software, but no one's been in there. Is it under maintenance?" One of the older aides looked up and said flatly, "No, that's the one where the man died." I paused. I'd heard bits and pieces over the years, but I'd never gotten the full story. Turned out, years ago, long before I transferred to this facility, a man had been admitted in full-body pain, violent outbursts, incoherent speech. They thought it was withdrawal at first, then maybe a psych complication. But he deteriorated fast. Blood pressure spiked, then tanked. He broke the bed railing off the frame during a night episode and started screaming, loud enough to pull staff from across the building. It took 2 security officers and a nurse to restrain him safely. His last words were screamed into the ceiling, something about fire and hands pulling at his throat. He coded shortly after. It was ruled as an unusual death event, likely a combination of untreated schizophrenia and late-stage cancer-related delirium. But staff that had been there during the incident refused to use the room afterward. Patients placed there often became agitated or confused within hours. Some claimed they weren't alone in the room. Eventually, admin stopped assigning it unless there were absolutely no other options. Callie had never been inside room 14, not once to my knowledge. But that night, she knew. I never saw her growl again. Not like that, not ever. She passed away last year, peacefully. Curled in one of the laundry baskets. We held a little memorial, just the night staff, said a few kind words, lit a candle. She deserved that much. But I still walk past room 14 during rounds. It's still technically functional, still technically on the roster. And every so often, late in the shift, I find myself pausing just outside the door, listening, for a growl that isn't there anymore, but still echoes. We were trained to notice patterns, changes in vitals, altered breathing rhythms, small shifts in consciousness. But there's one pattern none of us charted. We just acknowledged it, quietly, among ourselves. I was working at a long-term hospice facility in northern Ohio. A modest place, 12 beds, soft lighting, always smelling faintly of hand soap and peppermint oil. The sort of place where the staff stays for years, where you remember every patient who's passed, not just their names, but how they died, how their families looked when they said goodbye, what the room felt like afterward. It started with a night nurse named Gloria. She'd been there nearly 15 years, rarely spoke unless it mattered. One morning after shift change, she stayed back longer than usual, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I asked if everything was all right. "I think I saw a cat last night," she said, eyes fixed on her coffee. Small, black, ran past room 4 just before she coded. I remember frowning. We didn't have cats. No animals, actually. We had a few knit blankets with cat prints, donations, and maybe a mug or 2 in the break room with kittens on them, but no live pets. She must have mistaken something in her peripheral vision. Except, the next week, a day nurse mentioned something similar. Something brushed against my leg in the hallway. she said casually during lunch. Like a tale, but when I looked, nothing was there. Room 7 had passed that morning. Then it started picking up. Different staff, different shifts, always the same description. Small, quick, dark, cat-sized, not running chaotically like a stray might, but with purpose, like it knew where it was going. Sometimes seen slipping into rooms, occasionally perched in the corner just for a moment before disappearing. I didn't speak on it, not at first. I'm not superstitious. I'm the one who's called when it's time to remove IV fluids, titrate morphine, or contact the funeral home. My role is to bring peace, not chase shadows. But then came Mrs. Halverson. She was in her late 80s, heart failure, sharp mind to the very end. She had no surviving family, just a niece from out of state who called occasionally. She liked to sit near the window and talk about her late husband's laugh. One night, she called out on the call bell. I went in. She didn't look frightened, just curious. "Did you bring a cat in here?" she asked. I told her no. She smiled faintly, pointing toward the chair in the corner. Strange, it was sitting right there, just watching. Pretty little thing. Nothing was there, of course. She died 3 hours later. After that, I started paying attention, really paying attention. It never happened in front of visitors, never during loud moments or shifts with a lot of movement. It came in the stillness, night shifts, early mornings, during comfort baths, or moments just before breath ceased. Once, I thought I saw it too. I was restocking a caddy pump in room 2. The patient, a younger man with pancreatic cancer, was in active dying. The window was cracked slightly per his wishes. I caught something in the corner of my eye, just under the bed. I turned. Nothing. But his wife, sitting beside him, whispered, "Did you see the little black cat?" I looked at her. She blinked slowly like she was unsure if she'd imagined it. It just walked under the bed. He always loved cats. I didn't say a word, because how do you explain that to someone? How do you say, yes, you're not the first? We had security check once, maintenance too. They walked the halls, checked for signs of droppings, scanned under the beds, looked at the perimeter doors. Nothing. Not even a hair. But the sightings didn't stop. If anything, they became more consistent. Always within 12 to 24 hours of a patient passing. Sometimes we joked about it, softly, respectfully. "Shadow cat's on the move," someone might murmur after spotting a flicker down the hall. We'd check the census board and look at who was actively declining. Almost always someone in that wing would be gone by morning. I started noticing the quiet acknowledgments. Nurses checking corners before entering a room. Techs who refused to say they saw it, but would glance toward empty space a little too long. One CNA brought in a small cat charm and pinned it to her ID badge. She never explained it. What I came to believe, and I say this not lightly because I am not one to give in to sentiment or superstition, is that the cat wasn't ominous. It wasn't there to scare us or them. If anything, it was gentle, predictable, consistent. It never meowed, never scratched, never lingered longer than a few seconds, just appeared, observed, disappeared. One nurse, fresh out of school, cried after her first sighting. She'd been on the fence about whether hospice was the right place for her. Said the cat made her feel like maybe death wasn't the end. Maybe someone or something was always waiting to walk you home. I didn't argue with her. Some shifts, especially when I'm sitting vigil alone at 3 a.m., I find myself hoping to see it again. Not because I want someone to die, never that, but because in all the loss I've witnessed, that cat, that shadow, might be the only consistent grace we're granted at the very end. And somehow, that makes all the difference. We had a therapy cat at our hospice for nearly 8 years. Her name was Mags, short for Magnolia, a rescued gray tabby with a kinked tail, clipped ear, and a gaze that made you feel like she was reading your pulse just by looking at you. Mags wasn't just tolerated, she was part of the staff. She never interfered with treatment, never got in the way of meds or linens. But she had a sense, an uncanny one. Somehow, she always knew where she was needed. And on this particular day, it was room 6. The patient, Mr. Harwood, was in his early 70s. Nonverbal by the time I came onto my shift, slipping into the final stage. Multiple myeloma, His breathing was shallow and uneven, skin pale with that waxy tone that makes nurses pause before touching. His daughter Melissa had been driving in from out of state. We weren't sure she'd make it in time. Vitals were declining fast. Oxygen saturation barely holding at 80% despite the nasal cannula. His heart rate was irregular, with long, alarming pauses on the telemetry monitor. I'd already adjusted his morphine for comfort and switched him to mouth swabs instead of water. He wasn't responsive anymore, just drifting. Mags had been curled up on the recliner across the hall most of the day, ignoring visitors, dozing like usual. But just as I was doing my third set of checks before a scheduled turn, she stood up, stretched, and walked into his room without prompting. We usually let her go where she wanted. She was intuitive but respectful. I expected her to jump on the chair near the window like she often did, or maybe curl up near the foot of the bed. But instead, she leapt directly onto the mattress, quiet, measured, and stepped gently across his abdomen, then settled right on his chest. Not kneading, not purring, just lying flat, head tucked beneath her paw, like she was waiting. I was about to lift her off when I noticed his monitor jump. And then it happened. A sharp intake of breath, one of those deep, sudden gasps that snaps the room into silence. He opened his eyes, wide, alert, like he'd been pulled out of something deep and disorienting. His pupils tracked the ceiling, then my face. He blinked once, then again. Then he tried to speak, but it came out as a weak rasp. I called the charge nurse in. We checked his vitals. Everything was still unstable, but he was conscious, cognitively present, and breathing on his own. Mag stayed on his chest. I didn't tell the daughter what happened over the phone, just urged her to drive safe but fast. She arrived a few hours later, breathless, still in her work uniform, makeup smudged from crying on the way. He was awake when she got there, not talking much, but holding her hand, responding to her voice. I watched her brush the hair off his forehead and sob when he smiled at her. They had nearly 5 hours together. Not full conversation, but enough. Enough for eye contact, for hand squeezes, for I love you and it's okay now. He passed the next morning, peacefully, quietly. Melissa was sleeping on the cot beside him. Mags was curled up in the corner chair. None of us tried to explain it. There's no medical basis for it. The morphine didn't reverse. The disease didn't plateau. By all measurable standards, he should have stayed unresponsive. But he didn't. She brought him back, just long enough. I've seen countless deaths, some expected, some drawn out, a few sudden. But the ones that leave a mark are the ones where something intervenes, something we can't chart, something we feel more than observe. And Mags, she knew. She always knew. She died 2 years ago, old age, peacefully in her sleep. We held a small ceremony, staff and a few family members of patients who remembered her. We had photos, cards, someone brought her favorite fleece blanket. We still talk about her sometimes. Still find ourselves looking toward the hallway, expecting to hear that familiar soft tread and light thump as she leapt onto a bed. Some say animals just react to pheromones, to shifts in breathing or scent. And maybe that's true. But sometimes, I think she stayed long enough to finish her rounds. And on that day in room 6, she did what none of us could. She gave a father one more breath to say goodbye. And gave a daughter the moment she'd never forget. Thank you so much for watching and being part of this growing community. Your support means the world to us, and it's what keeps these creepy, fascinating, and sometimes comforting stories alive. We'd love to hear from you. If you've experienced something eerie, unexplained, or deeply moving, feel free to share your own story in the comments below. You never know, your story might be the next one featured. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to help keep the chills coming. We couldn't do this without you. See you in the next one.